and then choose virtual background. And then when you get to that settings screen, pick background and filters.
Okay.
And then under your video frame, there should be a little plus sign to the right.
Got it. Got it. Got it.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, we are ready to go when you are.
All right. Well, good morning, commissioners, and welcome to the month of June. How far we have come in 1 year. I welcome this month as it brings with us a full availability of the vaccines against this COVID-19 pandemic, and more time for all of our community members and employees to get vaccinated so that everyone can get out for some summer fun this year. So it's really wonderful to have that guard against this terrible pandemic. So anyway, it's wonderful to see you all today. I hope you all had a great 3-day weekend. This is Chair Catherine Harrington, and I'm joined by Commissioner Pam Trees, Commissioner Jerry Willey, and Commissioner Nafisa Fai. The first item on our work session agenda today, Tuesday, June 1st, 2021, is Board and Leadership Communication. Who would like to go first? Anyone?
I can go.
Go ahead, Commissioner Fai.
Good morning, everyone, and happy month of June. And I see you have your Pride flag. Chair Harrington, happy Pride month, June. I think last week was really busy with budget hearings and budget meetings. So I don't really have a lot to report other than to say that I had also great meeting with ODOT staff, Lucinda and Brenda, about the tolling program, and facilitated by Chris. Thank you, Chris. And really asked really good questions about, the definition of tolling and how we're defining that versus congestion pricing, and also talked about the whole tolling program and the impact it has on our residents for Washington County. And I'll be bringing more conversation forward to the board about that issue. But it sounds like we're going to be in the same boat as Clark County when it comes to the tolling program. And then I wanted to wish Brenda happy belated birthday. I had a great lunch. Brenda Saragosa, who was also supporting me while I didn't have the staff. So thank you, Brenda, and that's my leadership report.
I'll go next.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Pam.
Thank you, Commissioner Fai. Thank you all for reminding me to unmute. I appreciate it. Go ahead, Commissioner Willey.
Yes. Well, thank you, Commissioner Trees, for giving me the green light there. Yeah, last week, budget meetings, and there's going to be more conversations, of course, about what we heard. And I believe when we go into get ready for the final, we're going to hear more conversation about public safety and a variety of other things. So I'm anticipating that. Also had the opportunity to have a town hall with Representative Solomon and Mayor Lenahan with North Plains last week. That was good. It was an hour, and we heard from a variety of constituents. Mostly, I think we heard two things. At least I heard two things. One is an update from Representative Solomon about what's going on in Salem and all the priorities and things that she's dealing with. So that was good to hear from her. And then the mayor from North Plains also talking about their aspirations for growth, and certainly hoping to someday get a grocery store in North Plains, and some of the areas that they're looking at for expansion of urban growth boundary for new additions on their city. The interesting thing is that they have a fairly significant single family development going on to the north side of their city, and the pricing and the inflation that's hit the construction industry is probably going to slow that down a little bit, and that's unfortunate because, as we all know, there's huge demand for housing right now, and so. But I think that's going to have an effect, or probably is having an effect on just about every construction project that's going on right now. So that's unfortunate. Also had, of course, met with the Hillsborough Board of Directors last week in their monthly meeting. The fun one was I went to Eagle Landing Park, and I appreciate certainly being there with Jack Liang joined us with Carl Schweitzer, and I got a quick little tour of it. I've got a map actually that I have asked IT if they could share. This is right at the parking lot of this, and it's just a small boat landing, things like that. Kevin, do you know anything about this?
Did you send it to Kevin?
Sent to IT.
Oh,
there it is.
great.
So that's the map that is right at the entryway. And for all you folks that are already canoers on the Tualatin, you know all about this. But up at the top left, it has where you put in up there. That is at Woodbridge Park, and all of the way that the Tualatin River kind of just wanders around all over, and then it has also where you can take out. Points that you can take out, and it has miles in between there and approximate timelines. So it's very cool. You can go to just about any one of our entry points and see this and know how long you're going to be on the river and things like that. Up by where you first put in Red Bridge up there, that's probably got the most brush and things on the river. And so that's a little bit more of the more treacherous, I guess you might call it. But other than that, it's just a nice, smooth flowing river. And it's certainly good that Diane, Clean Water Services, is keeping certainly the flow going. And yeah, it's just a great thing to do. I don't know how long it would take you to go to point A to point B from start to finish, but it's a long time. Yeah, you're right, Pam. I think Pam's probably done that or tried that. So anyway, okay, Kevin, you can take that back down again. Thank you. But anyway, where we're going with that is that landing was severely damaged by one of the high waters a few years ago. And so we have a project in place to upgrade that a little bit and certainly get that more accessible. Forest Trust Lands Advisory Committee was, of course, last Friday, and the chair joined me for a little bit. We might want to compare notes. Catherine, on your takeaways of that. I know Elizabeth was taking some notes for you as well. So we probably need to do that again. This is talking about the forest management plan and the habitat conservation plan, where all of that is at the time. And it's going to be several months before that's going to be available for public comment. And certainly I will keep you up to speed on that, because I think that's one of the things. I gave you the alternate plans for that's been provided by the Council of Forest Trust Lands group. And so I'll keep you up to speed on what we're doing with that. And then, of course, the other project is I met with several members of the COLPAC team for choosing a consultant for our rural broadband study that we need to get into place. There's money available out there. There's lots of attention to this project. And so I will be letting you know which consultant that we chose. We still had some follow-up questions to do, and then and where we are moving ahead on that. So that was all in a week. So thank you.
Great. Welcome, Commissioner Rogers. We're just going through board communications. Commissioner Terrace was ready to go next.
Good morning, everybody. And I'm obviously proud to be supporting the month of June is Pride Month, so I'm very pleased to do that. As far as reporting, the only thing that has not been mentioned is that the chair and I sat in on a childcare preschool for all conversation. It was a 2-hour conversation, and the first hour plus was introductions. So that tells you that there were a lot of people on the call, and I will defer to the chair for a report out. I had to leave at 11:30, but this is a very active group and a very committed group, and I expect that both the chair and I will continue to provide you updates so that you know what's going on as we determine what might be, as we work to determine what might be our role in this organization or in this opportunity. That's really all I have to say for this meeting. So I'm glad to be here with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Terrace. Commissioner Rogers, welcome.
Thank you. I was off camera, so I saw, Jerry, your presentation. That's pretty interesting. I think you ought to run it, though. I don't think that you ought to bike it. I know you could. I know you could. I have faith in you. In regard to tomorrow, I know Pam, you'll be there as well. The Work Systems Inc. We have a executive meeting. Before that, we have a finance committee meeting. It's an annually. We do that a couple of times a year, but to evaluate the CEO and talk about salaries there. We've got some briefings later on this week. I should even look. Sorry, guys, we got a holler rate briefing for all of us. You probably already mentioned Suzanne Bonamici's meeting, CWI meeting. Diane, we have that next Monday. It's the summer meeting, and then we have the R1 Act that evening. Have a metro housing, affordable housing on the 9th. Bunch of little stuff coming up. Anyway, I'll stop. I know you're all probably gone through all that already. So, hello.
No worries, Commissioner Rogers. No worries at all. I'll add. Last week, had the Westside Economic Alliance Board of Directors meeting on Wednesday morning, and there was quite a bit of discussion about the search for a new executive director, as their current executive director will be retiring from that organization the end of July. So they're scurrying about to put together all the requisite pieces to go look for a new executive director, though it's going to be hard to beat the current one because she has all kinds of great experience, enthusiasm, and is known as a good collaborator. Commissioner Terrace mentioned that she and I each attended a kickoff meeting for a new task force to look at the possibility of preschool for all in Washington County. As you know, the voters of Multnomah County approved a new program to help ensure that all young children had the advantage of preschool. It is thought that this will be a 10-month effort to examine the needs and potential options for creating a proposal for such a program here in Washington County. So it is just the beginning stage, as Commissioner Terrace said. So stay tuned as things begin to take form. We'll be sure to bring that to the board. Lastly, from me, I sent you all an email on, I believe it was on Friday, flagging something for today. It's an email from Friday at about 4:45, titled Memo Regarding Funding for Reimagining Safety. So you may recall that we had well, Commissioner Fye can't recall this because she wasn't on the board then, Catherine. But back in August of last year, we had a work session on a proposal to help fund a research project titled Reimagining Safety that would provide Washington County specific data towards a regional examination of public safety programs here in our regional area. On that email, I did include the snapshot from that work session as well. But I just wanted to memorialize that the ask was made of us to fund the project to the tune of $50,000 a year for each of 2 years. We're able to do that thanks to some savings from the Department of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement. And then we will work with the CAO for a supplemental budget to follow through for the commitment for the second annual disbursement. So I wanted to make sure that we had the common understanding of all of that. So, any questions? Nope. Okie dokie. You may have heard in the banter earlier before we started the meeting that I had a horrible night's sleep last night. Not sure why. Maybe I overextended myself. Dismantling my temporary work office, which had been in the guest room, and now I'm back to the what we call the equipment room, which isn't quite as comfortable. So I might have overdone it a bit yesterday. So if I seem a little slower, that's why. You might have to tell me to unmute a few more times than usual. Okay, I think that's it from all the commissioners. Oh, I wanted to show off my Pride t-shirt. Thank you to the to our HR officer, Eva Labonte, for working with our employee groups as well as a vendor to ensure that we had access to a bit more material to show our pride this month. So I believe there is an opportunity for us to each show our pride colors. I'll leave that to Ms. Angie to highlight. Okay, so we'll move on to leadership communication. Ms. Angie.
Thank you, Chair Harrington, Board of Commissioners. So, Chair Harrington, I'm assuming I'm in the square right next to you with your hand motion, and you're right next to me this morning. So we never know what order the squares are based on each of our visuals. So just following up, there is an opportunity to order t-shirts, also masks with the Pride logo as well. And that information is available on Horizons. I've heard lots of chatter from employees getting their gear, and so it's really exciting to hear that. Pride. So relative to COVID, we have 1 positive employee and 0 close contact quarantine cases of our workforce. And Washington County's vaccination rate is currently at 68.1%. Marnie checked this morning and the numbers have not been changed since late last week. So hopefully that's a little higher even at this point. Last week, the board had heard public comment on a request to transition to all electric leaf blowers. Our staff team is continuing to work on this. Just very briefly to update you where we're at. We have, most of our leaf blowers actually are electric. From an operation standpoint, electric does not have the same power as gas. And so with wet leaves, it makes it very challenging. However, staff are reaching out to the city of Portland to see how they have transitioned their operations because they have wet leaves in Portland, just as we do here. So more information to come. And I will include that information in next week's packet, which will also include, for example, as other electric vehicles that our facilities team uses, such as electric powered utility vehicles. In addition to, I've learned more about our integrated pest management program. And so some really good sustainability updates that I feel would be beneficial for the board to hear, as well as accessible to our community members. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. How about you, Mr. Rapplier?
I'm down to my last month here, and so nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane Taniguchi-Dennis, Clean Water Services.
Thank you, Chair Harrington, and good morning, Board of Directors. It's such a beautiful sunny Tuesday. We feel really lucky to have this gorgeous weather that's coming. We have no new cases of COVID, so we're very excited about that. The team is doing well in their transitions, and I'm very proud of them. In June, we're going to start the next phase of construction on this 2-year Tualatin Watershed Enhancement Collaborative. So our TWEC, one of our first projects that will address environmental and community needs. So it's a $15 million Cedar Mill Creek sanitary and stormwater management project, and it's going to replace a 40-year-old sanitary sewer pipeline that runs through the Tualatin Hills Nature Park, and it's going to add significant environmental enhancements to that area. It's really a generational investment that we're making on a critical piece of infrastructure. The construction will start soon, and it'll go through the summers of 2021 and 2022. The team is closely coordinating with THPRD because there's going to be trails that are temporarily closed or detoured, but the project ultimately will upgrade several boardwalks and trails. So we're going to make sure that we've got bilingual information out about the project, and we're proactive with the patrons there. But it's one of our largest projects this year. Thank you. Chair Harrington?
I was just wondering on that project, will the pipes involved be the same sized pipes, or and also you mentioned the pipes are 40 years old. Will you be replacing them with similar types of material pipes or different ones? Do you know?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So the diameter is getting bigger. So it's to make sure that we don't have any sanitary sewer overflow, so we can keep the wastewater in the pipeline, and it'll be of a construction material that we're hoping to get 100 years of longevity on. So right now, this is really driven by hydraulic capacity through that area, but it's just going to be a nice project, and it'll be coordinated with LUT. So it's really a great project that's been integrated. So.
Terrific. Commissioners, any questions? No? All righty. Well, I just want to check in then on today's regular business meeting agenda to see if there are any questions. I do want to note that on the consent agenda, item 7 had a bid award that was added, and that's a 2021 pavement repair project. And that's it for changes on the agenda. And we just have one ordinance today that we'll be reading. Go ahead, Commissioner Terrace.
Chair, item number 8 on the consent agenda, the contract went to David Evans and Associates, and I just want to mention that they're member in good standing of Westside Economic Alliance, along with 150 other members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All righty. Well then, without further ado, we'll move on to the next topic for our work session, and that is the Tigard River Terrace 2.0 concept plan. Do we have Stephen Roberts and company available? Hello, Warren from the city of Tigard. There's Stephen. Are we expecting any other folks with us this morning?
Let's see, Skylar, are we expecting Mayor Snyder?
I don't believe so. Tom McGuire is here. I don't know if you want to promote him to presenter just in case there's any questions that you might want to chime in on.
Sure, we can do that. And what about Sarah Breakstone? Is Sarah joining?
Sarah is not able to join this morning. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I just want to make sure we've got your full crew before we give you the hot mic, so to speak.
Yeah, coming in off of a long holiday weekend too, right into this. So,
Well, welcome.
Yeah, so thank you for being here, Skylar. And so we've asked the city to come and give a presentation on the River Terrace 2.0. This is a proposed urban growth boundary expansion area that would be occurring mid-cycle. And Skylar is a senior planner with the city of Tigard, and he's going to walk us through this. And Chris Steffenbach is here with me as well. And so we're all available to help answer any questions that you might have going forward. And then later this year, I think the city will be asking for board endorsement or recommendation for approval of the advancing this UGB expansion. And so with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Skylar and let you take it away.
All right, thank you, Chair Harrington, rest of the commissioners. Good morning. My name is Skylar Warren, senior planner with the city of Tigard. I'm very excited to be with you all this morning and talk about what we've got going on in our concept plan for River Terrace 2.0. I will say that normally this is a presentation that I would be doing as a tag team with our consultant who was not able to join us this morning due to an automobile breakdown on the way back from camping over the long weekend. So bear with me if there's some things where I don't have all of her notes and might pause a little bit on a slide. So next slide. So in terms of what we're doing right now, I think all of you all familiar, at least roughly, with concept planning process, but just as a reminder, concept planning is really the first step in planning for the eventual development of, undeveloped, what we call them undeveloped areas, but primarily, agricultural areas that have been brought into the urban growth boundary. And we start off with community ideas and goals that kind of coalesce as a vision for the area that is the concept plan. Important to note that, by the Metro Urban Growth Management Functional Plan, concept plan does not have any sort of regulatory weight. It's not binding. Even if we wanted to rely on some of the, elements of this, we can't rely on them. It's meant to be a guide for future development, and it's really meant to help Metro get an understanding of how prepared our city is to readily urbanize these areas. So once Metro makes that decision, we move on to the community planning process, and that's our master planning process. If you're familiar with what's going on right now in the Witch Hazel area in Hillsborough, or South Cooper Mountain in Beaverton, or sorry, Cooper Mountain in Beaverton, they've now progressed into the community planning phase. And that's where we actually do land on policy. That is setting our comprehensive plan designations for these areas, zoning, development code, our fee structure, all that kind of thing. And then of course, we always like to remind people that even that is not the final step. We do see planning still happening as part of the development phase. So when someone comes in with a proposal for development as a plan development or something like that, we're balancing their desire for some flexibility here and there, or refinements that need to be made based on new knowledge that's arisen as part of their due diligence on a piece of property. So, we're still refining sometimes exactly where a street might stub, or exactly exactly where we'll land with the border of a natural area or a protected area, that kind of thing. So it really is important to understand that the development process is a continuum, and this is just the first phase. Next slide. So I'll give you all a little bit of sense of where we're talking about here. I think all of you are probably roughly familiar with the areas that we're planning for, but it's two discontiguous areas. They are known, we call them River Terrace West and South. They have some numerical designations. They're also known as Roy Rogers West and East. And to give you an idea of kind of where they are located, the River Terrace West area, that one that's labeled number 2 there, that's just south of Shoals Ferry Road and predominantly west of Southwest Roy Rogers Road. And the River Terrace South area, which is labeled 1 on this map, that is south of the current River Terrace area that's being developed inside the city limits of Tigard, but north of Beef Bend Road and notably north of King City's UGB expansion area, Kingston Terrace, which they're undergoing community planning for as we speak. Also important to note, it's not shown on this map, but kind of due south of that area labeled 2 and west of the one labeled 1 is a portion of the Tualatin Wildlife Refuge. So we're obviously very cognizant of sort of that natural area being an important part of the planning for this area. We obviously want to maintain habitat connectivity and those kind of things as part of that. So next slide here. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about our project vision. Next slide. You'll notice that some of these slides are in 2 languages. Where we do have, we really tried to make all of our outreach efforts at least bilingual. Where we have slides that have translation on them, we leave the translation in. I'm not going to go through the Spanish language, but for posterity, if someone's coming back and they want to look at this, that translation is preserved as part of the record. So our project focus, this is sort of a high-level guide for what the work that we do, and it sits above our project vision. And the way I like to describe it is like a pair of glasses. And it's the lenses through which we view the work, right? And like a pair of glasses, we have 2 lenses. And for us, those are equity and climate change. And like a pair of glasses, these are very interrelated. They are intended to work together. And that's partially because, we know that the negative impacts of climate change are disproportionately borne by communities of color, immigrants, and people with low incomes. So we want to make sure that we are addressing equity needs in our community, along with our community's goals related to climate change. So next slide. So, using sort of the vision or the focus that we have there, and what we as staff sort of know that we need to bring to the table, and in consultation with our community advisory committee, we came up with a vision statement for the work that we're doing here. I will kind of run through this really quick. It's a lot of text, but River Terrace 2.0 is a neighborhood for everyone in a complete community. It offers housing opportunities to the full diversity of Tigard's families and households. This community is made complete by providing space for small businesses and a thriving local economy, a variety of housing options, and accessible parks and open spaces. The transportation system treats all modes equally, with walking and biking trails throughout the community, a road system that emphasizes safety and regional access, and a development pattern that supports an efficient public transit system. Public spaces and parks offer places for the community to gather, Natural areas are protected and enhanced to emphasize habitats and scenic views. Public utilities are designed to maximize cost efficiency and long-term fiscal sustainability, and the costs of necessary infrastructure are shared in an equitable manner. Next slide. So I'm going to talk really briefly about our community engagement work. We started this project just, really in earnest. Our kickoff was in July of last year. So this work was completed entirely during the COVID-19 pandemic and entirely through remote work and remote meetings. And you can see a screenshot here from one of our Community Advisory Committee meetings. Next slide. So obviously, we had to pivot pretty quickly with this project to be able to, like anyone else in this environment, to change our approach to community engagement and make sure that we meet those equity goals that we have. And I'm not going to say that it wasn't a challenge, but I think we did rise to the challenge. And one of the things that we did pretty early on was to put out a community survey online where we asked people what makes a great neighborhood. And it was an online kind of open house format. It had 20 questions related to housing, commerce, transportation. 135 respondents. That's a pretty good number of respondents for a city of Tigard. We also had our community advisory committee made up of 12 members. We had 5 bilingual meetings. 3 of the members of that committee preferred to speak Spanish, and so we had simultaneous translation. Those were all held remotely. I held open office hours. We had 3 events of an hour each with about 15 participants come through. We did a Spanish language focus group with 12 community members. And then we had 2 public open houses that were held in both English and Spanish. Those were not discrete events. They were held over the course of 2 weeks, so people could kind of come and participate in the open house at their leisure. And we had some community meetings with our local stakeholders and, of course, our project website. Next slide. So based on the feedback that we got from the community, we came up with some preliminary concepts. Next slide. I'm not going to dive into these too much because I think it's mostly important to talk about the preferred alternative. I do want to point out that these had sort of very different arrangements of the interplay between housing and supportive employment areas, supportive commercial areas, parks, trails, that kind of thing. And ultimately where we ended up, we did get a kind of preferred alternative back from the community. But we also heard that there were elements of the other 2 that were of interest to them. And so the project team, as much as possible, brought in the elements from the non-preferred alternatives where possible to address those community concerns. Next slide. So I'm going to talk really briefly here about the basics of the preferred alternative. Next slide. So the key considerations that we had in doing this, hearing back from the community, is that they really wanted a larger commercial/employment center in River Terrace West near Shoals Ferry. There was actually a lot of interest from the community in a grocery store. There are some shopping options in this area, like Barrows Road has some grocery stores, I believe. But for the River Terrace, Cooper Mountain, King City area, there's not a lot of options there for a convenient local grocery. And so that was something that was of great interest. But aside from that, they were more interested in neighborhoods that were organized around a Main Street corridor, as opposed to what we would call more conventional strip center suburban development, where you have kind of surface parking lots along high volume arterials that are in shopping areas that are mainly intended to serve regional traffic and capture regional traffic. So there's a lot of interest in kind of balancing that center with the need for a more community-oriented commercial approach. And then that Main Street would balance livability with those external connections. Wanted to make sure that there was a flexibility to bring in the Tile Flat Road extension. We wanted to make sure that all the neighborhoods achieved an average of 20 units per net acre. We wanted to make sure that the connection that the city has with Beef Bend Road, particularly at River Terrace Boulevard, where it would terminate into, or at least cross Beef Bend Road, that it's reflecting what's going on in King City's planned town center across Beef Bend. We want to achieve our parks level of service standards, but leave enough flexibility for how and where we meet those standards. You know, we don't want to be locating parks at this stage of planning. We want to get an idea of how many parks we need, what's total acreage, and how might we dovetail those with our need to preserve natural areas. And we want to preserve maximum flexibility for transit. We know that not only is the city of Tigard interested in transit, but so is Beaverton and so is King City. And so we want to make sure that the plan accommodates transit. Next slide. So this is kind of roughly what we're talking about here. I'm going to kind of go over it really generally, and then I'm going to talk about the two areas separately. So when you're looking at this, anytime you're seeing the dark purple, those note a commercial employment area neighborhood node. And then we have three, we'll call them levels or development patterns for the housing areas. One is the Main Street housing area. The next is the even mix, and the next is the feathered edge. I'll get into those a little bit later, but suffice to say that they're just different housing pattern approaches. And then we have a set of basic road frameworks. I mean, very rough at this point. We know kind of generally where we need connections. And, you know, we've in some cases planned a little bit around some minor street connections, but mainly we're looking at only arterial and collectors at this stage. We know pretty much roughly where our vegetated corridor areas are and our wetland areas are. We had a consultant going out and doing field studies where they could get access to properties. Sometimes they can't get access to all the properties, and so there's some deduction involved in locating some of these things. So again, those are still kind of rough depending on the level of work that was done by the consultant team. And then, you know, we also have some rough ideas of where we might have some trail connections. Next slide. So in the west area, you can see this larger kind of purple area toward the north along Shoals Ferry. That's that larger commercial employment center. It is intended to be supportive to the neighborhood. This is not, you know, a major, you know, these aren't major employment lands. This is intended to be shopping and employment areas for the neighborhood of River Terrace 2.0 and to some extent River Terrace 1, South Cooper Mountain, and Kingston Terrace, because of course they're right there as well. But we're really looking at the future of commerce, right? I mean, again, this is all happening during the time of COVID. We don't know what office life is going to look like when we, you know, quote unquote, return to normal. It's possible that we might see more remote work. I don't know if any of you all are like me and find that even when working remotely, it might be nice to have your own space and a flex office from a couple of days a week or something like that, if you don't have great office space at home. So, you know, there might be some more people who are looking for that as an opportunity, for example. We also don't know what, you know, how things are going to balance out with the return of restaurants and service industry and the balance between micro retail and larger retail. So we're really trying to keep this flexible, but understand that we need both employment opportunities and opportunities for commerce for the people who are living in this neighborhood, because one, it serves them, but it also serves to reduce vehicle miles traveled, because when you don't have to drive to Barrows Road or to 99W to get a loaf of bread, gallon of milk, you're obviously cutting down on greenhouse gases, and that's helping to meet our climate goals. Again, you've got kind of a Main Street area that is, you know, kind of surrounding that commercial area of Main Street housing. And then we're basically transitioning back to the feathered edge housing pattern. The roads, we have a connector at Bull Mountain Road, a connector at Mountainside Way. You can see the tall flat road extension planned for there. And then where you see the dashed line that's connecting down from Mountainside to Bull Mountain, that's noting that there's less certainty in the location of that road. We know kind of where Mountainside would connect. We know where Bull Mountain would connect. That middle portion is a little squishier. There's a lot of topography in this area and a lot of engineering concerns about how that road gets aligned. And so we don't have a best fit line at this point for that road. Next slide. And then similarly here, you can see that commercial area that's extending up along River Terrace Boulevard there. That's extending that King City Town Center concept. So just enough commerce to really kind of carry that Main Street approach through. And you can see here, we also have a lot more wetlands. The topography here is a little more flat. And so of course, when you have that, you have a lot more wetlands just popping up. In terms of roadway connections, of course, we have that River Terrace Boulevard connection coming down, and then we have a planned connector going east from Lassetch Lane there. Don't know again what the exact alignment will be for that through the area, but you can kind of get a sense of how things are generally laid out. Next slide. All right, I'm going to talk briefly about our housing concepts here. Next slide. So our housing principles are that we want to provide for a diversity of housing choices. We want to make sure that we integrate opportunities for market rate and regulated affordable housing. We want to make sure that we're thoughtfully incorporating our natural areas and the commercial centers. And we want to provide that opportunity for the average of 20 households per acre. Next slide. So we have these housing typologies, the Main Street, the even mix, and the feathered edge. So what do they really mean? I don't know if she actually has these broken out into, can we go forward one slide and we'll see if they're broken out? Nope, okay. So I'll talk about, if we could go back one, I'll talk about these all on one slide. So the Main Street approach is, this is gonna be more like row houses and higher density attached housing that you would see along the Main Street corridor. And it's gonna transition back to more of the middle housing, single detached houses. You may see some cottage clusters in there, some courtyard units, but you're really closer to the Main Street gonna have that higher profile attached housing. The even mixed neighborhood, and this is kind of the bread and butter of this entire concept. You know, again, think of those different color areas that were shown on the map as sort of, again, conceptual. They might get bigger or smaller, but most of our neighborhood, I believe, is going to end up being the even mix. And this is a block by block mix of housing. Single detached houses, cottage clusters, courtyard units, quads, duplexes, triplexes, single detached houses with ADUs, apartments. And we want to really see that block by block mix so that even within a block, you might have a mix of cottage clusters and single detached houses. But at the very least, we want to see if there's a block that's nothing but single detached houses. We want to see cottage clusters on the block over. We want to see courtyard units on the block over. And partially that's for meeting our housing equity goals. And partially it's just because that's what we're hearing from the community they want, right? When we have a monotypical housing culture, right? We don't have a lot of options for people who want to age in their neighborhood, right? We don't have first-time homes. We don't have smaller homes for people to downsize to when they want to retire. If everything's 2,500 to 3,000 square feet, there's not a lot of opportunity for people at the beginning or end of the housing spectrum there. And so we want to make sure that if you want to live in River Terrace 2.0, aside from being able to go to get that loaf of bread and that gallon of milk, you can come in here as a first-time home buyer and find a home that fits your budget. And that's maybe that's unregulated, sort of market-based affordable housing, just because it's smaller lot. Maybe it's regulated affordable housing, but you also have an opportunity to then, as your needs change during the course of your life, you might upsize into a larger home in the same neighborhood. Keep your neighbors. As maybe your kids attrition out to college, and you want to downsize, assuming they don't move back in at some point, you'll, be able to get a smaller unit in the same neighborhood. And again, keep the same neighborhood, keep the same neighbors. And we also want to make sure that there's a lot of economic diversity here. This is important for our equity goals as well. It's really important, we feel, that the neighborhoods have this opportunity for people of different economic means to live near and next to each other. So next slide. I didn't really talk about the feathered edge there. Very briefly, it's just intended to accommodate housing along the edges of those natural areas without encroaching into those natural areas, but to make a better use of the natural areas, to integrate with it more seamlessly. So I'll talk briefly about our commercial employment concepts. Next slide. We want to provide opportunities for business and employment. We want to offer the opportunity for residents to acquire goods and services to meet their daily needs. Next slide. And I talked a little bit about this in the overall plan, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But again, this one is intended to, really accommodate that commercial need at Shoals Ferry. It's right across from Mountainside High School. Great opportunity to, pick up groceries while you're picking up your kids from school, or maybe if you're attending high school, maybe you get an afternoon job, after school job in this employment area. Next slide. Then we've got this commercial area along the Bull Mountain extension. That's about 4 acres roughly, so pretty small, and it would be mixed with some housing, so mixed use area. Next slide. And then, of course, the one that I mentioned that extends north along River Terrace Boulevard from the Kingston Terrace Town Center. Next slide. So I'll talk a little bit here about our transportation concepts. Next slide. So we want to make sure that the transportation system emphasizes pedestrian and bicycle connections within the neighborhood and out to the regional trails. We want to make sure the streets are designed for safety and to serve all modes of transportation, including vehicles, pedestrians, bicycles, and transit. We want to make sure the transportation system connects to regional facilities and extends existing streets and trails where feasible and economically viable. Next slide. So I'm going to run through a quick list of kind of the high-level projects that are part of the concept plan. We did a testing, an A/B testing on a couple of frameworks. One, the Mountainside Way extension, and then the framework B, which the Tile Flat Road extension, which you see there. And then we have the improvement to Vandermost Road. That's along that western edge, coming down from Shoals Ferry Road, extending Sabrina from Southwest Bull Mountain, improving Bull Mountain Road, upgrading Southwest Roy Rogers from Bull Mountain down to Beef Bend, and then extending Jean Louise east to the North-South Collector. Next slide. And then in the south, extending River Terrace Boulevard. I think I mentioned that before, extending Lassich Lane, upgrading Beef Bend, and that's in collaboration with our partners at King City and the county. And then multiple intersection improvements. Next slide. And then in terms of trails, there's not a lot to probably take away from this map, except that our team has done some high-level analysis and believes that we can, at least with the rough trail framework that was looked at, cover the entirety of the neighborhoods with trail access so that everyone is within a certain distance of a trailhead, so able to access those trails. And notably, we really want to make sure that the trails provide connections, not just for recreation, but as a secondary transportation system. So connecting to the commercial areas and to parks. Next slide. And then I mentioned before the transit piece. The nice thing about the preferred alternative that was chosen is it actually does offer the biggest flexibility for transit service. And so we have a couple of options for transit. The A option is to actually run the transit along the interior of the development area, so along those Main Street commercial areas. So that serves to both activate those areas, provide connections, also to supportive for the transit itself, right? Transit wants to be where there are close by destinations and density. And so, so that's one great option. A second is maybe the more conventional approach, which is running the transit along the arterials and having the stops sort of at the junction of those corridors. I think, in terms of serving the neighborhood, the A option might be a little better. It's going to get people closer to home. It's going to feel like a little safer, to have a transit stop in your neighborhood, lower speed street than along the arterial. But of course, we're going to work with our partners at TriMet to see what's feasible there. Important thing is that we have flexibility. Next slide. Our park concept, I'll spend very little time on this. Next slide. Basically, all the things I said, we're trying to integrate the natural areas, make sure they're preserving them, dovetailing parks needs with preserving those natural areas wherever we can. Next slide. We know that we're going to have a total of 2 community parks and a total of 4 neighborhood parks in the west area. Next slide. And we know that we're going to have 1 community park and 4 neighborhood parks in the south area. Next slide. Stormwater concepts. Next slide. I'll go briefly through this one too. The take-home message here is that we don't know exactly where the storm facilities are going to go at this stage. But we do know that there's some opportunities to potentially enhance existing wetlands in some areas to provide for stormwater storage potential. So, we're just looking closely at those, know that there is some opportunity there for wetland enhancement. Next slide. Implementation concepts. Next slide. There's not probably a lot of new information here if you're familiar with UGB expansion areas. Essentially, we know that funding for the transportation infrastructure, the sanitary, the storm, the parks, trails, it's going to be a mix of private development paying in the form of or building along with development, supplemental fees like SDCs, transportation development tax, grants where possible, cost reductions where possible, stormwater management charge, capital funds, that kind of thing. Nothing surprising in here. Next slide. And then I do want to end on notably a key part of this. There's so much to communicate. I know I've gone long here probably, but there's a lot to communicate. But I do want to go back and emphasize that sort of the driving factor here. We're looking at a mid-cycle inclusion or mid-cycle application for UGB expansion, which is housing focused, right? And we've come into this project with a housing focus. And so we're not just looking at concept planning in terms of where things might go, what kind of things we might place in different areas. We're also looking at what are some policy areas that we can explore as part of this next stage to meet those housing goals. Because we know that there are a variety of regulatory and in some cases non-regulatory, like finance barriers to meeting our housing goals, right? We all want to see more middle housing. But even when middle housing is legalized, it's not always built, and that's partially the result of the way that the market works. There's a lot of unknowns, right? In the development community, there's a lot of unknown in the finance community. And so we're looking at what are some strategic interventions that the city can make in terms of policy to really meet what we're hoping to achieve as part of our housing. So we're looking at tiered SDCs, so basing our SDCs on the square footage of the unit. There's some precedent for that now. And we know that some of the other communities like Wilsonville with Frog Pond, and I believe Beaverton, Cooper Mountain they're also looking at that. City supported small developer loan fund. Marketing, so really building our relationships with affordable housing developers. Incentives for ADUs on existing lots or new lots. Looking at opportunities for land acquisition and land banking that would be led by city or a housing developer or a CDFI partner. Education and information, a community land trust model. So looking at ways that we can bring permanent affordability to this area, not just affordability. So preserving it for perpetuity, as opposed to the sort of the 30-year window that you normally get with LAHTC or something like that. Tax abatements, and a host of other things. Next slide. So thank you for your time. I actually don't have my clock in front of me. I'm sure I went long. There's a lot to communicate. So I'll just stop there and take any comments or questions.
So, Mr. Roberts, in our work session worksheet, it talks about the purpose and desired outcome. So I think we've gotten a great overview of, thanks to Mr. Warren, of the level of planning that the city of Tigard and the community have gone through. And secondly, the additional desired outcome was to prepare the board for consideration of a letter of support and acknowledgement for when this is submitted to Metro for inclusion into the urban growth boundary during a mid-cycle review. So I certainly understand that we are a new board as of the beginning of this year, but also as the beginning of 2019. So the 5 of us have not been through a standard UGB cycle before, let alone a mid-year cycle. So as the director of Washington County's Land Use and Transportation Department, could you or someone from your staff please enumerate what the difference is and what our role is?
Yeah, I'm going to let Chris take that question for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, that's right. 2018 was a long time ago. So with we call it the new Metro's new Title 11 in their growth management functional plan, calls for doing, it's what was put in place to address the planning for the urban reserve areas. And it calls for cities, it calls for, actually the language says the county responsible for land use planning in an urban reserve and the city likely to provide governance for the urban service area shall, in conjunction with Metro and appropriate service districts, develop a concept plan for the urban reserve prior to its addition to the UGB. So this is a new phase, and we saw 4 cities, Wilsonville, Hillsborough, Beaverton, and King City, go through this and come into the UGB in the end of 2018 with concept plans. The concept planning process also has other requirements, such as having a finance plan and having a service agreements with providers. In other words, this is Metro's way of saying, before you commit to the UGB, we want to make sure that you have a plan that's really going to develop, so we don't bring land in that sits for 20 years and that faces community opposition, that you have everything planned together. So what's different, and for the other 4, well, I don't think we did Wilsonville. For the other three, the
So
board.
this isn't a standard UGB
This
cycle.
isn't
That's
standard.
what I'm
That's
trying
right.
to get at.
That's a state. This is not. But in the past, the board did put in a letter of acknowledgement. I mean, it actually acknowledged the plans and expressed support for them. And then Metro put conditions of approval when they were approved. This is a unique new, although it's still required to follow Title 11. It is the first mid-cycle. So that means it's the first time that a Metro is considering urban growth boundary expansions in between the 6 years that are statutorily required for consideration of urban growth boundary. And it means that this time round, there's it's designed to really address housing shortages. It's supposed to be addressing residential needs. And so this is a new one for the whole region to consider. So I think it might be appropriate for Tigard to, if you'd like to hear a little bit more about having Skylar talk a little bit about why go for the mid-cycle now instead of waiting for the full urban growth boundary expansion in 3 years. That would be.
I would like to hear that, but what I'm trying to make sure I and my colleagues have the opportunity to understand, because I don't know that I do at this stage, understand if there is any different requirement placed on us as the county board of commissioners with regard to a mid-year cycle versus a regular UGB cycle. Because the Metro Council, our colleagues on the Metro Council could very well turn to any of the five of us and say, why should we do this work now when in 2024, which will be here before we know it, we're going to be having to deal with this. That's all.
Yeah. So the concept planning process is still supposed to follow the same Title 11 requirements as any during the regular cycle. But the reason for the why now in terms of the mid-cycle had to do with concerns at the end of the last cycle in 2018 that there may be more housing demand, housing need than can wait for the full 6 years. So they're supposed to come in to really say, we're coming out of a recession. A lot of our data was in 2018, even then was, we're not, there's always doubts about the growth forecast. So this is a provision that was allowed to allow for meeting housing, special housing need that might not have been anticipated. So it's a new thing for us, and it is, as you well know, it's very complex. I think personally, the addition of HB 2001 with additional middle housing allowances makes it even just a little bit more complicated in terms of assessing need, in terms of capacity. So it is always there's always something new in in estimating housing need.
Well, so to be clear, I think Mr. Warren, the city's done a really nice job of planning, going through the concept planning for this urban reserve area. And so my questions aren't related to that, but rather someone has to make the case that the time is now. And I'm not sure if Metro staff has to make that case to the council, or if Washington County staff has to do that, or Tigard has to do that, or what. That's all.
Yeah.
I'm just not clear on that at all.
Yeah. And I believe Tigard will need to make the case, and Metro staff will need to consider, but they will be looking to us to the county to see whether we support it or not. And the extension, it used to be June. There was an extension to the end of this year because of COVID for submitting the applications for the mid-cycle.
And yes, I'll thank you, Chris. I guess I'll add that yes, we are. It's sort of an odd thing, right? The city is normally in the position of being the approval authority in some way for land use decisions. In this case, this is essentially a land use application that the city is putting together to Metro, and the Metro Council is the approval authority for the city's application for UGB expansion. So we will be making the case in the way that any applicant would be on a land use decision. And then the Metro staff, will be sort of in the role that we normally are as planning staff. And they'll be working with us and also making a recommendation to the council one way or the other. And I would say also that, yes, the mid-cycle, it was sort of enshrined in state law as part of the grand bargain several years ago. That really changed the way that we do UGB expansions in the metro area. And it was built in, and then Metro, sort of refined it locally for the process and procedure as part of an amendment to the Metro Urban Growth Management Functional Plan. It is housing focused, like I said, and we are focused on the housing component primarily of this. It does allow for some supportive commercial, which is kind of where we kept things at a very low, like overall percentage of the commercial areas that are really intended to be just part of the neighborhood, part of a complete neighborhood. And then the other thing I would say is that we know that there's no shortage of housing shortage, right? No matter how much we build, the pipeline of housing is still not enough to meet the region and the state's needs. If anything, I think just from my perspective, things seem to be like getting worse in a sense, right? The competition for housing is as high as it's ever been right now. And so 6 years is a long time to, have land ready in the pipeline. From the time that we start community planning in this area, it will still be 5 or 6 years before you see any kind of earth movement out there. And that doesn't even count, the applicants need to go out and finance things. So we are very interested in making sure that there are appropriate pipeline opportunities for housing. And we also see this developing, fairly quickly within the next 10 years. And really importantly, this is the city's opportunity to get that HB 2001 middle housing item right. And we legalized middle housing prior to HB 2001, so we have a very keen interest in seeing that proceed, and we see a great amount of opportunity in the greenfield development.
Commissioner Rogers.
Yeah, well, thank you for the presentation. Normally, I've seen a lot of these over the years, obviously, and most of them have been a little different in terms of their development. I'll just throw out, I don't know how I feel about this, honestly, and that might be a surprise to you, but I have some concerns. Some are just very easily attended to. One is that we're not really planning complete area in terms of, you have Tigard, but right across Beef Bend, you've got King City with a development as well. It'd be nice to more holistically look at what all of that looks like, so that we're not planning as we've done in the past at the county, where one development does one thing, another one comes in, he said, boy, that doesn't quite align well. So that's one comment. $70 million for transportation projects is not enough. And I know you're allowing in some of your language for flexibility to allow a tile flat. Frankly, if tile flat doesn't happen, this isn't a good project. There is too much congestion along both Shoals Ferry and Roy Rogers not to have some large highways to get in and out. I think your whole arterial issue needs to be looked at. Whole corner of up there by the high school on Shoals Ferry, already overburdened, oversubscribed. This is going to do a lot more with the commercial development, which I don't know how I feel about that. Again, I'm just one person, but it just seems like even though you're saying modest, that does drive a lot of transportation issues. It's huge. I've always been concerned about this area in terms of the refuge. That was a great project that went to the west, but frankly, critters and animals, they don't just stay in one little tiny area. And I know you're planning for some, but when you put the densities that you're planning up next to those vegetation corridors, they're going to disappear. And I don't know what that does long term to the refuge. I just have some concerns about that. When Denny Doyle was mayor of Beaverton and I was involved in the 2017, we argued a lot about having TriMet service this area in transit. Obviously, we didn't see these plans, but we were looking at what was happening on the backside of Bull Mountain, plus all you see in Beaverton there next to the high school. And at the time, they had no budget for it. And to my knowledge, they still have no budget for it. So I don't know where the budget for the transit's coming from, but the way that this is being developed, this is a auto-oriented development, frankly. I know you're saying it's not, and you're trying to make people walk, but there are not enough jobs in there for them to walk to work or to bike to work. They're going to have to leave the area. And so I don't know how comprehensive the transit portion of your development is. I know you got some lines and you say, we couldn't even get them to come out of Shoals Ferry, let alone come down into the areas you're talking about.
So just for a time check here,
we'll stop.
Mr. Robert and Mr. Warren, we're going to need to have Tigard come back to answer various questions. So Commissioner Rogers, I just want to make sure you have an opportunity to go through your questions and that all the commissioners do.
Great, I'll stop with that.
Okay, okay. Other commissioners, do you have any questions?
I don't have a question, just a comment. I thought it was a great presentation. It looks like just a tremendous amount of community input and planning and all of that. So, you know, albeit I don't know the details that certainly Roy knows and all the intricacies of that, but I think you did a great job as a community putting together all of the outreach and things like that. So I thought it was a great presentation.
And I saw Commissioner Terrace, you gave thumbs up. Commissioner Fye, do you have any questions at this point?
No, I don't. I agree with Commissioner Willie. I really appreciated the language that, you know, how it was reflective of the communities and nationwide. So I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the project being focused on equity and climate change, because that's the new problem that we need to tackle, those two. So thank you, Mr. Warren. Great job.
So from my standpoint, I think Commissioner Rogers is right to point out that there are some questions still outstanding on this. My particular one is one that the combination of the planners and the lawyers are going to need to get together and lay out for us what the criteria are that will need to be met in order for the staff of Metro to approve taking a UGB expansion request to the Metro Council, because they will run through, if the past is any indication, they will run it through some type of criteria examination for that. So before I want to see the Board of Commissioners entertain a letter of support, I think we can all see that there's been good work done on the planning concept, but you know, there are some rightful questions that Commissioner Rogers has asked that the Metro Council will highlight as well. So I think he's right to bring those up. From my standpoint, I go back to what is the criteria that Metro has laid out for a mid-year decision, because they're going to have to get LCDC acknowledgement, I assume, but I'm not a lawyer, I assume that they'll have to get acknowledgement of the mid-cycle. And I'm not against mid-cycle. It's just that the case has to be made. And that's the part of the presentation that I haven't had the or packet material more specifically, that I haven't had the opportunity to digest and hear today. So really, that's where I stand with regard to moving forward on any particular letter of support. Any other comments, commissioners?
Just one quick one, and I would say, again, I agree with Commissioner Will. You've done a great job in terms of planning, but we need to plan at a county level, a much broader regional than you're doing in the city. And so that's what I'm bringing up in terms of, let's integrate it in with the city of King City. Let's see what our neighbors to the north in Beaverton are doing. And let's not burden the county system because we haven't put enough money in the transportation system to make certain that circulation. And bring our friends at TriMet into this conversation in a big way to get commitments to serve the area. So anyway, I think you've done a nice job. It's just that there's a bigger area we're looking at.
Okay. Well, thank you. We'll continue to work with the city then and work on some of the additional information that we've talked about here today. And I do want to compliment the city. They've been really good at working with us to help address a number of questions and concerns as we've moved through the process. So we continue look forward to continuing that good work.
Great. You did a good job, Mr. Warren, without your handy dandy consultant.
Thank you all.
Yep. Thank you.
All righty. That's it for the morning portion of our work session. We will reconvene at, well, I have a question. There is the potential that we might get through our business meeting at 11 o'clock or so. Do we want to try, if staff is available, do we want to try and reconvene earlier than 1 o'clock for our work session? The board does. Ms. Angie, might that be a possibility?
I'm looking at Stephen Square to see his thoughts.
Yeah, let us check with our presenters and see if we can get somebody lined up at 11 o'clock, and we'll let you know as soon as we can.
Okay, great. All righty. Well, we'll see you all back on a different Zoom link for our board meeting at 10 o'clock. Thank you.